The storm came in off Lake Nipissing without warning, the way the worst ones always did in December. No slow gathering of clouds, no long amber light at dusk to signal what was coming. 1 hour the sky above Harwick Lake was clear and hard and cold, and the next it was a white wall moving south at 50 miles an hour, filling the world with noise. Rowan Mackenzie didn't hear the accident. He felt it. A vibration through the frozen ground, something heavy giving way. He'd been crouched over a snared rabbit not 40 yards from the old Milligan Road, and when he stood and looked east, he saw the faint glow of a lantern going out. He found the wagon on its side in the ditch. One wheel still turned in the wind. The horse was gone. Smart animal had bolted east toward the village. In the snow beside the wagon's overturned box, barely visible, was a shape that didn't belong to the landscape. He reached her in 6 strides. She was conscious, barely. A schoolteacher's coat, he could tell by the careful darning at the collar. The kind of care taken when money was short but appearance still mattered. Her right wrist was folded wrong. There was blood above her left brow, already freezing in the cold. "Can you hear me?" he said. Her eyes opened, dark brown, frightened, but working to hide it. "My wrist," she said. "I know. Don't move it. Can you walk if I take your other side?" She could. It took time, and she made no sound the whole way back to his cabin, even though he knew every step cost her something. He had the stove banked high. He sat her down, lit the lamp, and got a proper look at what the cold had done. Frostbite on 2 fingers of her left hand. The wrist would need setting. The cut on her brow was shallow. Head wounds always bled too much, made things look worse than they were. The rest was bruising and shock, and the particular shaking that came from a body that had burned through its warmth reserves and was running on fear. He filled a basin with water that was not quite warm, cold enough to bring the feeling back to her fingers without burning them. He set her wrist while she looked at the far wall of his cabin and breathed through her teeth. When it was done and splinted with cedar strips and a torn shirt, she finally looked at him directly. "Claire Donnelly," she said. "Rowan Mackenzie." She nodded once, like they'd shaken hands. "I teach school in Harwick Lake." "Taught." She paused. "I was trying to reach the train station." He said nothing. He had heard the name. Everyone in Harwick Lake had heard the name, though she'd arrived at his cabin before he'd made a decision about what to think of it. He put a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of tea in her good hand, and he let her be quiet for a while. The storm had settled in to stay. She wasn't going anywhere tonight. Neither was he. In her coat pocket, when he hung it by the stove to dry, something fell out, a small tin, the kind that held mints or lemon drops. When it opened, it wasn't candy. It was a folded piece of paper, 2 photographs, and a ring on a thin silver chain. A child's ring, small as a thimble. He closed the tin and set it on the shelf where she could see it. He did not ask about it, but he thought about it for a long time after she slept. She was still there in the morning, which surprised neither of them. The snow had come halfway up the door. Rowan brought in wood. He made porridge, which he ate standing at the stove, and she ate sitting up on his cot, with the blanket still around her shoulders. Her wrist was swollen and purple at the edges but clean. No fever. That was the thing that mattered. She looked around his cabin the way people looked at places when they thought you weren't watching. The wall of books, the worn chair beside the lamp, the 2 photographs on the mantel. One of a woman, one of a mine shaft, both taken the same summer. "You worked the Kendrick mine," she said. He looked up from the stove. "Foreman, 9 years." She didn't ask the next question. He noticed that about her, the way she stopped herself at the edge of things. "My wife died there," he said. It came out flat, the way it always did when he said it out loud, like the words had worn smooth from being turned over too many times. "Cave in. 1903. I wasn't on shift. I had gone to town for supplies." The fire crackled. She didn't offer sorry. He appreciated that more than she knew. What was her name? Claire asked instead. Vera. She nodded. She looked at the photograph a moment longer, then looked away. Not from discomfort, but with the particular respect of someone who understood what photographs were for. He had offered her the cot and slept in the chair. On the second day, she was well enough to sit at the table. On the third, when the snow had broken under a bright, cold sun, he went to Harwick Lake for flour and salt and came back to find her standing at his bookshelf with a volume of Tennyson open in her good hand. She didn't startle when he came in. She just said, without looking up, "I taught this one last spring. My class of 14-year-olds thought it was terribly sad." "Isn't it?" "Terribly," she agreed. "But I like sad things that are true." She put the book back carefully. "You have good taste for a trapper." He took off his coat. "I was a foreman." "You have good taste for a foreman." He couldn't account for what happened next, which was that he laughed. He hadn't done that in some time. Muriel Croft arrived on the 5th day. She came in a sleigh with her husband's company crest on the side, which was the Harwick Lake way of announcing that you mattered. Rowan saw it from the window and felt something settle in him, cold and quiet. Muriel was Stuart Croft's wife. Stuart being the man who ran the Croft Trading Company and sat on the school board and had been the one to say, publicly, that Claire Donnelly had stolen $40 from the church collection. That had been in October. By November, Claire had been asked to finish out the term and then leave her position. That was the story Rowan had heard in pieces, from the hardware counter and the post office. The way you heard everything in a small town. Not whole, but close enough to the shape of things. Muriel walked into his cabin, without knocking. "Claire," she said, looking past Rowan entirely. "I heard you were here. I wanted to make sure you were being cared for." The way she said it made the word mean something else. Claire was at the table, her splinted wrist resting on the wood. She didn't stand. "Thank you, Muriel. I'm recovering well." Muriel's eyes moved across the cabin, the single cot, the 2 teacups on the table, the intimate smallness of the space. She took it all in and filed it away. "Stuart is concerned," she said. "A single woman in a bachelor's cabin. People will wonder." "Let them," said Claire. Muriel's mouth tightened. She looked at Rowan then, properly, the way people looked at things they wanted to put in their place. "Mr. Mackenzie, surely you understand the optics." The woman was already dismissed under. "She was dismissed on your husband's word," Rowan said. "Which is a different thing." Silence. Muriel pulled her gloves tighter. "I'm trying to be helpful." "You've been helpful enough," Rowan said. "The door's behind you." After she left, Claire stared at the table for a long time. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." "She'll make it worse. She's very good at making things worse." He sat down across from her. Outside, the sleigh bells moved away through the snow. "What did you actually do with that $40? She looked up. "Nothing. I never touched it." Her voice was steady, not angry. The voice of someone who had said this many times and stopped expecting to be believed. "I was counting the collection after the service, the way I did every third Sunday. When I finished, the amount was short. I reported it to the deacon. By the following week, Stuart Croft had decided I'd taken it myself." "Why would he decide that?" Her jaw tightened. "Because Stuart Croft needed somewhere for the blame to go that wasn't his office." She paused. "His bookkeeper left town 2 weeks before the money went missing. I don't think that was a coincidence. I think Stuart knows it wasn't, either." Rowan turned his teacup in his hands. He thought about the tin on the shelf. The child's ring. "What's in the tin?" he said. She was quiet. Then she got up and took it down herself, opened it on the table between them. "My daughter's ring. She died when she was 4. Scarlet fever." She touched the silver chain, didn't pick it up. "The letter is from my mother. The photographs are her and my sister." She closed the tin. I carry them so that if something happens to me, whoever finds me knows I was somebody's, not just a school teacher, not just a thief. Her voice didn't crack, but it came close. I was trying to get on that train because I had nowhere left in Harwick Lake. I thought I'd try Toronto, start again. I'm good at starting again. He looked at her hands, the careful way she'd folded, the tin's lid closed, the same care he imagined she gave to everything that had been entrusted to her. You don't have to leave, he said. There's nothing here for me anymore. He didn't answer that, not then, but he sat with it for a long time after she'd gone to sleep. He went into Harwick Lake on the 8th day, when Claire's wrist had settled and she could manage the cabin without him. He didn't tell her where he was going. He went to see Berta Inglis first. Berta was 73 years old and had taught school in Harwick Lake for 30 years before Claire had. She lived in a white house on the corner with a spruce wreath on the door and opinions about everything, delivered plainly and without apology. She was the only person Rowan had spoken to voluntarily since he'd left the mine. The Croft bookkeeper, he said, after she'd given him tea he didn't want. Name was Fulton. Where'd he go? Berta looked at him over her cup. North Bay, why? I want to write to him. She studied him. This is about Claire Donnelly. She's been staying at my cabin. Her wagon went over in the storm. Berta set down her cup. Rowan Mackenzie, you pulled that girl out of a snowdrift. The wrist needed setting. You always did have a talent, she said, which he suspected wasn't only about bone setting. She gave him the address. Then she said, Stuart Croft knows exactly what his bookkeeper did. He's known since October. He let that girl carry it because it was convenient. Somebody should say that out loud. Somebody, said Berta, is going to. He came back from town and found Claire sitting on the step despite the cold, her coat buttoned up, her face tipped toward the pale winter sun. She had found his copy of L.M. Montgomery somewhere in the bookshelf. He had not admitted to owning it, but he did, and she was reading it with her good hand, the book braced against her knee. You were gone a while, she said, without looking up. Errands. She turned a page. Did you know she was from Prince Edward Island, Montgomery? I'd like to go there someday. See where books like this come from. He sat down on the step beside her. It was cold enough to see their breath. I wrote a letter, he said. She looked up. To a man named Fulton, former bookkeeper for Stuart Croft. I asked him some questions. Claire was very still. Why? Because you didn't take that money. You don't know that. I do. You've known me 10 days, Rowan. 9. And yes. He looked at the tree line, the spruce dark against the white sky. I know because you carry your daughter's ring in a mint tin, so somebody will know you were loved. People who steal are afraid they're worth nothing. You're not afraid of that. You're afraid of something else. She didn't speak for a long moment. A chickadee landed on the fence post, looked at them both, and left. What am I afraid of? She said quietly. He took his time. Asking for help. Because you've been handed things to carry that weren't yours, and you've carried them so long, you've forgotten you're allowed to put them down. Her breath fogged the cold air. She looked at the book in her hand. You should go back inside, he said. Your wrist. My wrist is fine. But she got up. At the door she stopped and said, without turning around, Thank you for the letter. He didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed on the step until the cold made it impractical. She said it on the 12th day, when her wrist had healed enough that she could think about leaving. He had come back from checking the south trapline and found her making bread. Or attempting it, one-handed, with determination he might have found funny if it hadn't been so clearly deliberate. She had flour on her chin. The kitchen smelled like something warm and ordinary, and good. He took off his coat and without discussion washed his hands, and came to stand beside her and work the dough. and she stepped back to let him without saying anything. They worked in quiet for a while, the particular quiet of people who had stopped needing to fill silence. Then she said, "You should know that when I leave here, the town is going to say things about this, about us, about what they think happened in this cabin." She was looking at her hands, not at him. "It's not fair to you. You've already done enough. You don't need that on top of it. I'm not concerned about what Harwick Lake says. You live here." "Barely." He shaped the loaf. "I trap. I do not attend events." She almost smiled. "Still." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you saying this because you mean it, or because you think it's what you're supposed to say?" She didn't answer right away. That was her way. She didn't speak until she meant it. "Both," she admitted. "But also, Rowan, I'm 32 years old, and I have a dead daughter and a ruined reputation and a tin full of things I carry in case I die in a ditch. That's not I'm not." She stopped. Tried again. "You deserve somebody who isn't carrying all of that." He turned and looked at her for long enough that she finally met his eyes. "I've been alone 11 years, he said. "Not because there was no one, because everything I looked at, after Vera died, looked like something I hadn't earned, like I didn't have the right to want any of it." He paused. "It took me 9 of those years to understand that wasn't grief. That was punishment, and it wasn't making anything right." She was very still. "You are not your reputation," he said. "You are not what Stuart Croft said about you, and you are not a burden because you've been hurt." He looked back at the bread, not because he meant to, but because he didn't know how to hold her gaze and say the next part. "I've known a lot of people. I've known very few worth knowing." "You're worth knowing, Claire Donnelly." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the wind had come up again off the lake, moving through the spruce boughs. "You should think about that more carefully," she said. But her voice had changed. "I've had 12 days, he said. "I'm a slow thinker, but a thorough one." She laughed then, sudden and surprised and real. Both hands coming up to cover her mouth, flour going everywhere. He watched it happen and thought the sound was something he hadn't known he was missing until now. Berta Inglis spoke at the school board meeting on the 14th of January. She stood up in the middle of Stuart Croft's remarks about the upcoming school term and said, in the voice she had used to quiet 30 years of grade 8 classes, "Before we go any further, I believe there is something the board should see." She placed a letter on the table. It was from Thomas Fulton, formerly of the Croft Trading Company's accounts office, now residing in North Bay. It detailed, in a former bookkeeper's careful handwriting, exactly what had happened to $40 in October. Stuart Croft's chair scraped back. Berta waited until he was finished talking. Then she waited some more. Then she said, "Claire Donnelly taught at this school for 3 years. She kept her class attendance the highest in the district. She visited 6 students at home. She organized the library collection out of her own wages." She looked around the table. "She deserved a fair hearing in October, and she did not receive one. She deserves her position back and an apology the town can hear." It was not unanimous, but it was enough. Rowan told Claire the next morning. He had brought the news back from town the evening before and waited until she was awake and had her tea, because that was how she was. Better at receiving things when she was ready. She listened. She held her cup in both hands, the splint off now, the wrist still tender but working. She didn't cry, but he could see the effort it took not to. "Berta Inglis," she said. "She's formidable." "She is." Claire put the cup down. How did she know to speak? He said nothing. She looked at him. "Rowan, I may have gone to see her." "You went to see her?" She looked at the table. "You wrote to the bookkeeper, and you went to see Berta Inglis. You were too busy making bread one-handed to do it yourself." She was quiet a moment. Outside, the January sun was doing something remarkable to the lake ice. turning it silver and gold, the kind of beautiful that only happened in the worst part of winter, when the light came back but the cold hadn't broken yet. Then she said, "I want to stay." He looked up. "In Harwick Lake, if they'll have me back," she took a breath. "And near here, if you want that." He had spent 11 years living alone and not regretting it in any conscious way. He had made a kind of life from solitude, the way a river makes a kind of life cutting through rock, patient and shaped by what it couldn't change. He had not imagined it would be a woman with flour on her chin and a dead child's ring in a mint tin who made him understand what he'd been building away from. "I want that," he said. She nodded, the way she had nodded when they'd first introduced themselves. Like a handshake, like a fair and honest agreement. Then she said, "I'm going to teach Montgomery to my students this year. I don't care if the school board thinks it's too sentimental. It probably is. Good things usually are." Spring came late to Harwick Lake, the way it always did. Reluctant, the snow pulling back from the shore, inch by inch, the ice going out with a sound like the whole world cracking open and settling into something new. The spruce took on a color just slightly less dark than winter, a green that hadn't quite decided to commit yet. On a Sunday in April, Claire walked into the Harwick Lake church with her hands folded and her head up. Her position had been reinstated in February. She had sent Berta Inglis a jar of her mother's blueberry preserve and a card that said only "thank you," which Berta had told her was more than enough. Rowan sat beside her. He did not usually attend. He had not attended for 11 years, but he had put on his good coat and driven in from the cabin and taken the seat beside her without discussion, and she had moved her hymn book over so he could see it, and they had sung off-key together. And when the service ended, and Muriel Croft looked at them from across the aisle with the particular expression of a woman whose narrative had been taken away from her, neither of them looked down. After, on the church steps, one of the younger mothers, a woman whose son Claire had helped through a difficult winter of missed school, came and pressed her hand and said, "I'm glad you stayed." Claire said, "So am I." Rowan stood a little back, not because he was hiding, but because the gratitude was hers, and she had earned it, and he wanted her to receive it whole. On the walk back to the wagon, she reached up and straightened the lapel of his coat where the wind had turned it. It was a small thing. The kind of thing that happened between people who had stopped needing to account for their proximity. "You're a good man," she said. "Adequate," he said. "Good," she repeated firmly, and he let her have the last word on it. He drove her back to the schoolhouse, and she got down, and she said she'd come out to the cabin on Thursday with a book she wanted to argue about. He said he'd have the stove hot. She said she'd hold him to it. He watched her go up the schoolhouse steps and through the door, and then he sat in the wagon a moment longer than necessary in the spring cold, listening to the last of the ice going out of the lake somewhere behind the tree line. That long, slow breaking open sound, and thought about how some things you carry for so long that you forget they have weight. And then somebody comes along and helps you set them down, and you stand there in the new lightness of it, feeling like a fool for not letting go years earlier, and grateful, deeply grateful, that it wasn't too late. He turned the wagon toward home. The lake was silver in the afternoon light. The road ahead was mud and bare rock and the beginning of something green, and it was enough. It was, he thought, more than enough.